In this video, we're going to talk about ordering rational and irrational numbers. In other words, putting them in order from least to greatest or greatest to least. So let's jump right in. And the question, the first one we're looking at is, what symbol correctly completes the statement 4/3, and we have a blank in between, and the square root of 2. And basically, we're trying to figure out which of these is larger, 4/3 or the square root of 2. All right, well, let's take a look at this. Why don't we convert both of them to decimals? That's probably going to be the easiest way to figure out which of these comes first. So let's start with 4/3. I think we can all see that 4/3 would be the equivalent of 1 and 1/3, which would be the equivalent of 1.3, repeating. Okay, got the whole number 1, and 1/3 is the same as 0.3, repeating. Now the square root of 2, no one's going to know that one off the top of their head, so let's use a calculator. Let's see, what is the square root of 2? Once again, we're going to put in the number 2, use the radical symbol, and we can see that it is 1.4142, and it is an irrational number. It just keeps going on forever. And I think we can agree that 1.4 is larger than 1.3 repeating. So we can say that 4/3 is less than the square root of 2. That would be our first example of ordering rational numbers and irrational numbers. All right, here we are given another set of numbers and we need to order them. And let's see, it says from least to greatest. So once again, I am going to convert these into decimals if they're not already in decimals so that I have some idea what their order is. Okay, so pi, most of you know, would be the equivalent of 3.14. I don't know what the square root of 11 is. That's something I'm going to need to check. So once again, I'm going to clear my calculator. 11, the square root of it would be approximately 3.3. So that would be the second one, is the square root of 11. And clearly we can see 3.4 and 3.1. Okay, so let's make sure we understand what the question is. And the question is least to greatest, right? The smallest quantity to the largest. So our solution for this would then be 3.1, that's our first one. Cross that out so you know we have it. What do we got next? We have pi, I believe, which would be 3.14. So actually, I'm just going to write the symbol for pi. Okay, that goes. And then we would have the square root of 11, which is 3.3. And that means that what we're left with, the largest, of course, is 3.4. So once again, what did I do? I took pi and the square root of 11, and I converted them into decimals, 3.14 and 3.3. And I'm sorry, I wrote this as the square root of 3.3, and really what I meant to say was that's the square root of 11. So my apologies there. There you go. Showing your work allows you to find your mistakes. So once again, your answer would be 3.1 pi, the square root of 11, a not very pretty square root of 11, and 3.4, ordered from least to greatest. All right, let's take a look at one more example. As a matter of fact, I'm just going to do this so you can see it. How's that? All right. All right, in this last example, I'm going to start by converting all of these into decimals if they're not already in decimal form. So let's start with the opposite of the square root of 16. So we've got the opposite of the square root of 16, and this, of course, would be the same as -4. Our next one we have is -16 sixths. And -16 sixths, if I converted this to a decimal, would end up being -2.6 repeating. And you can do this, obviously, by hand or by using a calculator. The third one is going to be the square root of 8. And if you were to do this on your calculator, you would see that the square root of 8 is approximately 2.8. Okay, that would be the square root of 8. 2.6 is, of course, already a decimal. And lastly, we have the opposite of the square root of 10, and that is going to be approximately -3.2. And so I did these on a calculator, once again, like I did in my earlier examples, And now I need to order them, and I'm going to use them in their original form. All right, so -4, I think we can say, is certainly the least of these numbers, which was the opposite of the square root of 16. So that would be first. And then second, what do we have? -3.2. And that, I believe, was the opposite of the square root of 10. So that would be second. And third would be, looks like -16/6 was 2.6 repeating. So I'm going to put -16/6 for that one. And then we get into our positives. So we have 2.6 would be our next one. And that was this 2.6. And then we have 2.8. And 2.8, of course, was the square root of 8. All right, put some commas in there. So once again, I converted each of these into decimals if they already weren't. I remembered that the negative sign outside of the radical meant the opposite of. That's how I got my negative decimals here. Except for the fraction, of course. I knew that if there's a negative symbol by a fraction, the entire fraction or the decimal that you convert it into will be negative. And that's how we order things from least to greatest or greatest to least when we're comparing rational and irrational numbers.